What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So, we now know where Jermaine Burton and Latavius Brini are portaling to, and it is Alabama and Arkansas, respectively. We also saw that Lavassier Carroll is transferring from Georgia to South Carolina, although that's a much more minor move. He was a four-star running back in Georgia's most recent signing class. Got to Georgia, they had some depth issues in the secondary and were incredibly deep at running back, so they moved him to defensive back. He played out of position all year, never really saw the field, and is transferring to South Carolina, who was his number 2 school, and at one point he was committed to them in the last year's cycle. But that's not the focus of this video. This video is going to be focusing on Latavius Brini and Jermaine Burton going to Alabama and Arkansas. This is huge news for college football as a whole, and specifically for the SEC going forward, as we see even more in-conference transfers. There are, just an exorbitant amount of in-conference transfers, especially in the SEC, and that is a very interesting storyline to follow, in my opinion, going forward. Anyway, though, the Jermaine Burton news is a little bit more impactful than the Latavius Brini news, so we will start there. And losing Burton, that was already going to be a loss for Georgia, as he was expected to be a leader of the receiver room next year and likely the number 1 guy for that position at Georgia. But to lose him to Alabama just makes things hurt a lot more for Georgia in some ways. Burton is a legit NFL-level talent, and at Bama, with Bryce Young and their passing offense, he will be a day 1 starter for them and likely go for 1,000 yards, maybe even 1,500 yards. I'm not ready to put that on paper or anything, but it's very possible with his level of talent. And he's probably going to solidify himself as a first-round draft pick, barring injury or anything like that. So I really can't blame Burton for making the decision to go to Bama, just purely as a business decision for him. He's doing what's best for himself, and I absolutely can't hate on him for that. Alabama is a great move for him. However, the dynamics surrounding him going to a rival school in Alabama that they have just beat for the national championship, it's very interesting to say the least, in my opinion, although it doesn't really have any tangible impact on his decision or his on-the-field play in the future. But it is still a fun storyline to watch, especially for the fans, in my opinion. And I don't know. I don't like to focus on those kind of storylines all that much, but it is something. It's getting a lot of traction on social media, so I figured I would mention it. But as far as the on-the-field impact here, it is absolutely huge. Like I said, Bama is going to show once again why they are going to continue to dominate recruiting, both during high school recruiting and through the portal, and they're going to use the portal better than anybody else, really. And I think that is exactly what Nick Saban said would happen. I mean, they have Jamison Williams Part 2 coming to Tuscaloosa right now. It's not to say that Burton and Williams are similar in their play style, because they really aren't, but their impact is in role on the offense is going to be very similar as transfer one-year wide receivers to the Bama program. I fully expect Jermaine Burton, like I said, barring any injuries, which he did have a lot of at Georgia, to be the number 1 wide receiver for Alabama next season. I expect him to have a really, really strong showing all of next season, like I said earlier, again, barring any injury, which he does have a history of. But the rich just keep getting richer in a lot of ways here with Alabama, and they just continue to pile on talent on top of talent on top of talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball with their passing attack. They're going to be absolutely disgusting next year. Definitely the early favorite in the SEC, I feel like. Now, for the Georgia side of this equation, it's definitely a noticeable loss for them going forward, but it isn't like a program crippling blow or anything like that. Burton, like I said, was largely hurt during his time at Georgia, especially this past season, and he had a lot of his reps taken by 2 3-star freshmen behind him in Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell. And that's not a shot at him or anything, but I think that's a large reason why he left. And I think it's also pretty telling that Georgia won a national championship essentially without Burton providing much. I'll put his stats up on the screen. You can see he really didn't do all that much that was too impressive for Georgia. He played a role for sure, but nothing crazy. And they clearly, like I said, they did just fine. They won a national championship. Georgia's also going to have guys like Kearis Jackson, A.D. Mitchell, who I just mentioned, as well as Ladd McConkey. Arian Smith will be back and hopefully be able to stay healthy next season as an absolute burner of a deep threat. Dominic Blaylock should be back and healthy next season. He didn't play at all this past year. Marcus Hurst-Mujak should be back and much healthier next year. In addition to all the new freshman signings that they're going to add, Georgia's pretty deep at wide receiver. Also, Eric Gilbert is supposedly back with the team, so do with that information what you will. I don't know what to make of that, but that is the word, is that Eric Gilbert is back with the team. Georgia also will return Brock Bowers, who was their best receiving threat anyway last season out of the tight end spot. They also will return Darnell Washington at tight end, although Washington has been rumored to be mulling leaving the program via the transfer portal. Nothing is official on that, and so for now, I am assuming that he will be there. And those two guys are great targets for Georgia going forward, particularly Bowers. I'd love to see Washington get more involved just because he's a 6'8", 275-pound tight end who can move really well, especially for his size. He's a huge mismatch. Love to see him get more involved next season. They also bring in Oscar Delp as a very highly touted freshman tight end as well, and he's very much a pass-catching tight end, kind of similar mold to Brock Bowers there. I'm not saying he's going to be nearly as good or anything like that, but similar style of play for them. And then Georgia's also more than capable of adding wide receivers through the transfer portal going forward, and I would honestly expect them to add one, maybe two more guys to the receiver room through the portal. Maybe even after spring practice. That tends to be the Kirby Smart way in the portal. He'll wait for everybody on his team to, who's going to leave, and then he'll wait for that wave of transfers that comes in after spring practice when a bunch of people hit the portal again after they see where they're going to be following out spring practice, and that's where he makes a lot of his additions. And so I would not at all be shocked to see Georgia make a move there. But the point is that Georgia will be just fine at wide receiver, even if the loss of Burton to Alabama, of all places, really doesn't sit well with a lot of the fan base. I've seen a lot of people making some pretty disgusting comments at Burton online, and I understand why they're upset, but this guy's he's a person. He's making his own decision for him, and it's a business decision. I wish people would respect that a little bit more than they do, but that's all I'm going to say on that. And of course, also, everybody, and I say everybody, a lot of people, especially around Athens, are blaming Stetson Bennett for this somehow. And while, yes, him returning probably had something to do with Burton leaving, I think more than anything, Burton losing most of his reps to younger wide receivers this past season had a lot to do with that. He kind of wants to be in a situation where he's the guy. And Georgia's style of play isn't conducive to having 3, 4, 5 wide receivers all put up big numbers. I think to blame the situation on Bennett is incredibly short-sighted. It's honestly completely inaccurate line of thinking, and it's just scapegoating a guy who just won them a national championship, and that seems to be the popular thing to do around Athens right now. If anything, you should attribute this more to Bryce Young's greatness and how well he's played than you should to Stetson Bennett returning for Georgia, or even the rumored NIL deals that are packaged with him going to Alabama. I don't think that plays much of a factor either. Whatever NIL deals he's getting offered at Bama, I'm sure Georgia can match if they want. I don't think it's that. But regardless, this does make things interesting for JT Daniels going forward. He was rumored to be a package deal with Burton, particularly on the way to Ole Miss at one point. That seems to be completely inaccurate at this point because there's no way that JT is going to go to Alabama and be a backup quarterback again. Personally, I thought Burton was going to go to LSU or maybe even Ole Miss. Alabama kind of came out of nowhere and stole him. And as usual, you can never count out Nick Saban in any form when it comes to recruiting. Now then, moving on to Arkansas landing Latavius Brini. This is a less significant move for the whole of college football, and it's not going to get the same coverage as the Burton move will, but it is every bit as important for the Arkansas program as the Burton addition is for the Alabama program. Now, it isn't as significant of a loss for Georgia as Burton was, just because of how their roster is built, how it's set up, and their coaching staff. You know that they're going to have good defensive back play, more so than you know that about wide receiver play. But if you just look at the addition, this one is sneaky good for Arkansas. Latavius Brini is a great DB that I feel like is somewhat underrated at this point. Last season, one of my main gripes with Arkansas was their inability to match up with good teams, well in coverage, especially man coverage, mainly just due to their perimeter guys, particularly their corners, having a complete lack of athleticism. And Brini is more of a safety than a corner, but he played the star position for Georgia, which is essentially a slot corner, but it's also, it's more of a safety corner hybrid. And that's because that star position, that slot corner, they're going to have to play the run a lot more. They're going to have to match up with tight ends a lot more, play people in man coverage out of the slot, match up with running backs, blitz the quarterback every now and then. It is a much more versatile position than the corner spot normally is, and so you need a bigger bodied player who can also hold up well in coverage and things like that. And Brini fits that role, and he could play that same role for Arkansas. They could maybe even move him to more of a true safety spot, although I don't feel like that's best for his skill set. But they could move him to a true safety, make him more of a center field hole kind of guy or a deep hash player. I just don't feel like that's the best way to optimize using him. They could also make him transition to more of a true corner as well. But I think he just lacks some fluidity and just that pure athletic ability that you'll want on the perimeter that you would like to see from him. He would probably be better than Arkansas's current number 2 or number 3 corner on the roster. But I feel like his role, it will be best utilized in a similar hybrid spot in the slot or close to the line of scrimmage. Maybe even as a money third down linebacker, things like that at Arkansas. But he's very versatile. He can play in a lot of spots, and he is definitely, regardless where Arkansas plays him, definitely a starting caliber defensive back for them. And he could turn out to be one of their best defenders next season, in my opinion. I mean, you're talking about a guy who started 11 games for a pretty historic Georgia defense this past season. He played in 13 of them. He didn't really have any major mishaps as far as you could really tell, and he played very well. He was somewhat inexplicably replaced by William Poole in the SEC championship game and the 2 playoff games, but the rest of the season was all him, and he brings a real veteran presence with him. He's been around the block, so to speak. He's spent a lot of time at Georgia, a lot of time around very advanced defenses and things like that. So I think he could really excel as a transfer at Arkansas. And then you pair him with McGlothern, who's the corner from LSU they've added in the portal, and then Catalan at safety, who is an absolute stud for Arkansas last year. The secondary should be vastly improved, which doesn't just help the pass defense, though. It helps out everything. It allows for a lot more multiplicity in coverage, a lot more advanced disguises, also allows for a lot of basic coverages, like just straight up, cover 0 man, man free, even 2-man under type coverages that Arkansas has struggled a lot to run against high-level offenses last season because they just didn't have the dudes in the back end to run it and run it consistently without worrying about getting burnt. And it just really opens up the defensive playbook tremendously. It also allows for a lot more run blitzes and a lot more things up front to focusing on the pass rush or focusing on run stopping, and you don't have to completely sacrifice the back end of your defense to do that now as the secondary improves. I think it's a huge move. Individually, this is a big improvement for Arkansas, but the real story here to me isn't just this one move individually. It's the full set of moves that Arkansas has made, the full complement of moves that they've made in the portal this year, and what those moves together do for this program as you put them all together, what those moves do for this program, what they mean going forward as Sam Pittman really gets this thing rolling. And I'm telling you guys now, Arkansas is absolutely crushing it in recruiting, and they're crushing it in on-the-field development and play. They're a legit team to watch out for going forward. They're a legit contender in the SEC West. I don't think they're on Alabama's level yet, but honestly, past that, they could compete with really anybody, and I don't think that Alabama is just leagues ahead of them either. It's not like they're going to be completely uncompetitive with them. I mean, even this past season, they were really competitive with Alabama, and I only expect them to improve going forward. But with all that being said, that'll do it for this one. I just wanted to go quickly in depth on what I think these 2 portal additions mean for each team involved. Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think these players moving around in the portal, what you guys think about that, what you think it means, what kind of impact you think they're going to have going forward. And if you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a like because it helps out the channel tremendously. And lets me know what you guys want to see more of in the future. Also subscribe if you haven't, because I'll be uploading college football content very regularly in the future. And currently 96.4% of my viewers aren't subscribed. So it really would help out a lot if you guys would go ahead and subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.